All right, morning. It's 10:09, August 15th, County Cannabis Working Group meeting. I have a few people missing again today, so I'm filling in for Blake Alexander, who's the chairman, and I'll be filling in for him today as chair since he's not here. And instead of going right to the cultivation things, I think we're going to go to item 4, which is looking at these draft ordinance for retail and manufacturing, and give it the okay if it looks okay. Talk about anything we haven't seen maybe, and maybe get it to the Planning Commission as soon as possible. Is that the right order?
Yeah, with a stop at the ERC first.
Oh, right.
So yesterday I took not the exact language of the ordinance, but I took the concepts to the board. They were not on board with the 500 feet for medical. So this will be changing to 1,000 for both. And other than that, there is some cleanup, some typo stuff, but nothing substantial. The definition section will move to, sorry, it'll move to our general zoning definitions instead of being in there. But you know, the substance is something that staff is happy with. So with your comments, blessing, we'll move forward.
I haven't actually had a chance to look over all the details of it, but I was present for the presentation that Joel gave and listened to the input from the board. And I think whatever is politically viable for the board is good for the working group to recommend. So the changes that Joel made per the input from the board, I think is suitable, at least for the first go around. And yeah, sounds good to me.
I'd hoped that the 500 would go through for medical, but obviously if it's not gonna go through the board, it's not gonna go through anywhere. And so is there any other changes that we would be unaware of to the ordinance so far?
No, I can't think of any.
Bond, we didn't talk about the bond, you mentioned that.
The bond is something, so the state permit requires a $5,000 bond. Since we're going to be the ones dealing with the consequences, I upped that to a $15,000 bond. Bonds aren't really that expensive usually, 1 or 2%. So I think that should be doable for most people, I guess unless your credit sucks, but something like that.
When they get into bonds, does that have, does that have to list the county in that bond versus just the state, when the state just requires the $5,000
yeah,
bond?
It would be the county. It would be on a form approved by the county the way we do for kind of contracts. And so we wouldn't make it, I'm sure we'd offer a simple form that you'd sign and the surety would sign, and it shouldn't be a big deal, but it'll offer some protection, and even if it doesn't, it'll make it look politically more palatable that there's some protection for, and maybe the bond needs to be higher for cultivation, since that's probably where a nuisance site will end up if it's abandoned or something. Somebody goes out of business and they need to leave a storefront. I don't know if we're gonna need a bond to do anything. Yeah, but so it might end up just being kind of something that looks good.
All right, yeah, bond idea sounds good to me also.
So, in concept, what it is it's a use permit application process where you submit your operation plan. And so it's kind of one size fits all for all activities. Whatever your operation plan is, if it's cultivation, this should work just fine. Then there's a separate section of regulations for retail, a separate for manufacturing, and a space reserved to put in cultivation regulations. So this structure should be easily conformable to whatever happens in the future. In a separate chapter will be the combining district. So it'll be independent of this, and therefore this can work just fine with whatever happens with cultivation.
And the board was okay with all the combining districts that were put forth to them.
They didn't say anything about
Okay.
it. They, you know,
Just kind of
Yeah.
deferred.
I did show them a map that showed the outline of the urban boundary, so they know what we're talking about. So, they seem on board.
Supervisor Hemmingson asked if there was a cap, if we had included a cap, and I think there was a little explanation from Joel about why we didn't include a cap, and the board seemed mostly satisfied with that, I think. Any other comments on the draft ordinance?
It looks pretty much like what we've all discussed. It's a really good job, Joel. I think it's a great starting point, a good foundation to build the rest of the stuff from.
I don't know if
So
the public,
is there just was it just an individual line item then that was talked about medical cannabis being 500 foot, or was it a whole section in here?
No, it was 26 to 50 for retail regulations.
C, right?
So we'll just remove C. And then in D, get rid of the adult use.
Retailer of adult or medical use.
just retailer of cannabis, okay. Well, the public hasn't had much chance to look at the draft ordinance. There'll be more time for comment too. It'll go to Planning Commission and to the board and more public comment time, but any public comment on it so far?
It's my understanding that the 500 getting moved up to 1,000 kind of puts Patty's place in jeopardy. Am I correct on that? And I'm not sure what's the setbacks look like for the other operation we have here in Crescent City for the one-on-one. So I'm kind of curious as to if that allows for any currently.
Yeah, I think that the operation on North Crest, I think, is less than 1,000 feet from one school in particular. So I think under this proposed ordinance, it would not be able to apply for a commercial license from the state. The place on 101, I don't know. I can answer that.
We achieved a license. I believe that, you know, the one on 101 is in compliance. I would, you know, I believe that Patty's Place was kind of a scientific evaluation of, you know, that it did work, but, you know, we're kind of a group of consensus and kind of going for what we think the board will approve. And, you know, I wish there was a little bit more involvement, you know, from this person at this time. But the board really seemed that you know, we're really trying to hammer out things that we think that would be, you know, approved by the board so as not to waste too much time. And yesterday it seemed that the board would have a problem with having a variance in the setback for a medical dispensary.
I think a big part of what really was not liked was reducing it from the state kind of default of 600. I don't think that's going to be palatable to the community to say it's less than the state, and I think that's kind of where their head is. I you know, I like to have it the same for both. I don't see a good policy reason, and so, you know, I think this is going to be good. You know, I also think her problems finding space to rent aren't going to exist.
She should be able to find some. Yeah, I mean, you know, I'll just throw in my 2 cents in opinion. I think it's a good starting point, like I had said earlier. you know, I look at this ordinance as it is, and, you know, we actually have adult use recreational retail here, which is, you know, not happening in a lot of different places and localities in the state. So, you know, I think if we can start small here and get our feet under us, you know, we'll only be able to expand from this point for whatever the community can handle. So, you know, I think we should count our blessings and move on. Patty, I don't think will have a problem finding a place. Unfortunately, she likes the place she's in, but I think she'll be able to find a place. She's been operating pretty well, so, you know, hopefully there'll be a landlord willing to rent to her now that we have this ordinance in place. It'll be a lot easier for them to find places.
Yeah, I agree. In the interest of time, moving things forward, not messing with things too much. Yeah. Supervisor Berkowitz said he would be okay with the 600 foot, I think, to what Joel was saying, being consistent with the state number. The only thing that would, you know, if we were going to consider making some kind of change would be if we're going to have one number, we make it somewhere in between 500 and 1,000, like 800 feet or something. That would be the only thing that would make sense. And then we get one number for everything, no exception. But if we haven't, you know, if telling our patients together is maybe 1,000 feet, maybe it's 900 feet from a school, you know, I don't know. People haven't gone out and accurately measured things. That was one of the issues, was excluding too many areas that are good in the community by too large of a number. So I don't know. I don't know how big a deal it would be to come back and change it. We pass, you know, the board passes an ordinance, has 1,000 feet, and then we find out, well, shoot, we can't even find one viable place that's 1,000 feet away and has a landlord who is suitable to rent, you know, and all that. Now we can't even find a single place to put a store, you know. Then do we come back and change it in light of that? I don't know.
I don't think it'd be too hard to do that.
Okay.
I think, you know, it's easier than go the other way.
Sure.
And trying to get rid of things we established, so.
Okay.
Well, if I remember right, Patty said that hers was like 450 or 500?
It's 500, a little over 500.
So if you went to 800, it's still excluding, so it's just
Yeah.
easy to go to the 1,000.
Right. But we're just saying, like, Roberts may be not even 1,000. So we're, you know, I don't know, we've positively identified places that are definitely 1,000 feet away that are suitable, but anyway.
It depends on what the county does on some facilities they have.
Right.
Well, I think that goes
Sure.
in a lot of different ways.
That's the
Sure. Like, well, the school board, the gentleman here from the school board was talking about that, and just properties that they own, whether they're using them or not, can be considered facilities because they can be future use. So I don't know how everyone will define that.
Well, that leads me to a question about, has the school, have they given us a list? Remember, about 2 months ago, they had said they were going to be giving us a list.
Yeah, we received some maps from them, or we sent them our maps, and then they sent us back a set of maps that essentially showed where their properties were. But they also illustrated where all their bus stops are located, because that was their preference to also include the bus stops. But
Okay.
based on the ordinance that we have before us today, that was not included as being a point of measurement for any
Right.
type of business.
Okay, but that could be something that the school decides to bring up during the planning process,
Yeah.
or the use permit process,
It
correct?
could be. They could bring that up at any time.
Yeah.
If we did setbacks from every bus stop, there would be no spot available.
Right.
There's also, I couldn't find any law that says anything about bus stop. They can move their bus stops more easily than we can move a retail operation.
One other quick question that relates to that. In here, it also states, once you're given the use permit, your renewal, so say, you know, in Robert's case or in any other case, you know, we go through a use permit for someone, they're given the opportunity to operate for that year, they come up for the renewal. During that year time, county decides to put in something that, you know, might conflict. Does this state clearly that, you know, the renewal that is grandfathered in, or at least for that right to operate?
So it's a blend.
Okay.
As far as the distance from a school, that only applies on the first permit. But the planning commission on renewal is still going to make findings that it's, you know, not going to cause a nuisance or have a significant effect on kind of sensitive things. So if something comes into the neighborhood later and there's a negative impact, there will at least be an opportunity for the community to show up and pick one. But it's not going to be disqualified because something moved within 1,000 feet of you. That would
This gives each side equal and
Yeah.
opportune time to discuss.
Yeah. I think that was kind of the only way to make it, you know, we're only having yearly permits. So giving them a vested right to be there forever doesn't make sense. But we at least give them an opportunity to kind of have the conversation at the planning commission level every time.
Yeah, I'm glad I saw that in there because I thought that was something we should at least be talking about or have in some sort of language.
All right, super. Any other public comment on the retail draft ordinance? And manufacturing. We didn't talk a lot about that. That's just in the C4 and M. And then other operational things are going to come in more detail, I think, right? You can include those as separate packets.
Yeah, and we'll have to kind of figure that out as we go, what the market is asking for, I guess. One other thing is that the parts of the urban boundary that are in the coastal zone will have a separate ordinance that's going to start out identical, but go to coastal commission and come back with their comments. So, you know, for that part, actually operating will be delayed by, you know, some amount of time. But that, I think, is mostly down in Elk Valley, right?
Elk Valley and then the standard veneer, which are both areas that have, well, standard veneer has the manufacturing. So, yeah.
So, yeah.
Because generally what happens is once the planning commission makes a recommendation to the board, then the board makes a recommendation, they adopt a resolution that transmits that ordinance to the coastal commission, they review it, and then they typically give us back a list saying they want to address all these different things, and eventually you come to some agreement and they end up adopting an ordinance that may have modifications to what we originally submitted, and then we have to come back to our board and get them to agree to those modifications. And then it goes back to the coastal commission for final certification. So it can be a prolonged process, potentially, hopefully not, but just so everyone is fully aware.
Sounds fun.
All right, very good. Shall we move on? Back to order number one, item one, discuss commercial indoor cultivation. So that's sort of where we left off last couple meetings. And, or where we came to at the last couple of meetings was to prioritize the discussion with indoor, partly because it seemed a little bit more simple in terms of details and issues. It sort of fits into the zonings we've been talking about for manufacturing potentially. And then we also brought the discussion into the suitability of agricultural lands for indoor, which is item number 2. So we can kind of kick this off in any order. We also have item 3, discuss the 500 square foot cottage cultivation license type, which may have you know, a different set of areas that are appropriate for something not small compared to any other type of operation. So, if any of the public wants to kick it off, anybody here wants to kick it off, however we want to do it, doesn't matter. All right. Eric, you haven't been here in a while. What do you say? Oh, here we go. Saved by the bell.
Ernest Kroback. Will some of the businesses like manufacturing and cultivation possibly be able to do like a combining, where they can combine both of them, where if you're able to manufacture, you would also be able to possibly do some of this indoor, or maybe even have like retail and cultivation, or possibly all three?
Yeah, there's a license type, micro-business, that allows for a blending of 3 license types like that. And then if you had separate businesses, say business operations, different business owners, they could potentially be closely located, but I think per the state rules, separate businesses have to have you know, separate facilities, walls be separating them. but I think it can be something as simple as a wall in a building, different units, so it could occur in the same kind of zoning, I think.
Yeah, I believe the state is actually taking up the whole commingling of two separate businesses on the same property.
Right, there's the
Yeah,
S
there's-
license for manufacturing, the shared manufacturing license
Exactly.
type, which I haven't looked at the
And does
details
that,
of.
I wonder if, I can't remember if that includes being able to share cultivating and manufacturing on the same site.
I don't know,
I'm not
'cause
exactly
it's
sure
different-
Without a micro business license.
Different regulatory bodies between
Yeah.
the two, so I'm not sure.
Hello, my name's Jordan. I'm a local carpenter and contractor, and I just would like to bring up two main points that I think we should evaluate as a county are very valuable. And then that's that we have one of the most beautiful and highly quality productive microclimates right here in our local mountains. I think that the quality of sun-grown cannabis in this county is far greater than that of anything on the West Coast when produced properly. And I think that to encourage people to grow commercial indoor cannabis is actually not in the direction that this county would be most beneficial from. We have the cleanest air and the cleanest water, bar none. And I think we need to pay homage to that as far as protecting that and utilizing that to stimulate our local economy. Regarding permitting for indoor or mixed light, I think the key point needs to be that it needs to be affordable. If we want to encourage our local growers to participate in this, it needs to be approachable. I think the best example would be permitting by square foot. $1 per square foot for mixed light, I think is very approachable for a local organic farmer. I don't think we want to encourage big commercial cannabis grows in this county. We cannot compete with the volume that other counties have just in flat space alone. So encouraging many small farms is going to be the way that we stimulate our economy in the healthiest way, to not degrade our environment, but to utilize it in many small niche microclimates. This will allow us to have better jobs for our local people. In the southern counties where they are promoting large commercial cannabis farms, the hourly rate of pay is minimal at best. It's minimum wage, and typically in the South you'll see a lot of migrant workers to fill those jobs anyways. Better environmental protection. A smaller farm is easier to clean up should they choose not to operate compared to a 10,000 or 20,000 foot operation with leaching and just the amount of trees they would remove to do that. So we don't want to promote big cannabis grows. We want to promote small family farms that are producing the best quality in the state. And that's where we will stake our claim, is with quality, not quantity. I think that leads into my second point, which is to encourage what is known as best management practices. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with them. It's an organic, small family farm type environment where people live on sites, they grow food. It is a closed loop system where they're not trucking in large amounts of soil and amendments and unnecessary products. That again produces quality over quantity. And I think all of Delaware County should be, for the sake of our environment and our river, an organic producing county. I don't think we should allow chemically listed fertilizers and such. Thank you.
Thank you.
Living on the property is something that I think we talked about. I think I brought up to the board a long time ago, but it hasn't come up recently. I think it might be a really good way to control, at least for outdoor cultivation, making you primary residents or a residence on the property might make people feel like there's a responsible person there all the time. Might make me feel better.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I agree with that. How do we define resident? Would that resident have to be an employee, or would the resident have to be in any relation tied into the business? Or, say a resident is just a residence, someone's living on site? Because that would be how do you figure that out?
Would it be the permit holder?
Yeah, it would have to be
that
the
would make the
permit
most
holder.
sense.
I mean, huh? What'd
I
you
was
say?
saying that would make the most sense directly to achieve, I think, the purpose of it would be to ask the permit holder.
I think that's kind of the spirit of it. The permit holder lives there.
Okay.
Maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
a
we definitely-
caretaker versus.
Yeah, that would require some more discussion, some more thought about, like, would we require the permit holder to be the main resident, or, because that seems a little over.
If you have a bona fide employee, perhaps,
Right.
but
Yeah.
then it's
But
sort of
requiring,
detracts
say,
from
like,
the-
the owner to live on site.
It
I mean,
skips
that's
the
kind of
spirit a little bit of a small family farm but yeah, I don't know, it depends on the scale and over time, I suppose, if your business interests extend you to other farms and other operations.
I just think it's, if we require the permit holder to, and I'm just conjecting out this thought, if we require the permit holder to be the main resident of the property, it's kind of against the spirit of the state where they didn't, they're not requiring residency for a permit anymore. So it wouldn't necessarily be in conflict of what the state would say, but I do agree having a residence on site is definitely, for outdoor cultivation in particular, is probably necessary. But yeah, I think further discussion as to, should it be the permit holder, someone tied into the business or whatnot, it kind of seems like a personal, as long as a residence is on site, I would feel that would be a sufficient, at least at this point in thought.
Right. I know Trinity County started out with that. I don't know if they stuck with it. There was some talk of legal challenge of it, and I think that's why the state had started with being a resident as a requirement, and then they dropped that for some legal reason. What do you know about that, Joel?
I think there's a difference between, a residency requirement, like you can't apply if you're outside the area, and having a requirement that it be on, there be a residence on your house. When it comes down to whether or not, who has to be in that residence, I don't know. It might be better to just say a resident.
Yeah, because, it starts to get to the fact, I know we're trying to, we're all on board with the small craft cannabis family farm industry for here in Del Norte. We are definitely all on board with that. But small family farms are still going to need, financial backing and support at some point during this process to get infrastructure up and going. And so that's where it starts to get weird if we start to require the main permit holder, or do we get into, percentage of ownership? Has to be the permit holder. Does that, string tie our family farms from being able to get financing to help them, install cameras, do the fencing requirements, get the track and trace systems going?
The state defines the ownership through percentage
it's
of
an aggregate,
financial
exactly.
interest and
It's
such.
financial
There's all
interest.
formulas for it and things. So if
But
you
that-
had an investor, they're going to be required to have their name on the permit.
Exactly, but if our county requires the aggregate majority owner of that business to be the resident, then we're
Right.
stringing,
Sure.
our family farms couldn't go get Uncle Joe from Maryland to help invest with family money.
Sure.
The necessary capital to get the farms going, because that person would then have to be the resident on that site.
Sure.
So it's just one of those details we'd have to think through if we're going to require.
Yeah, we think it through. Definitely, if there's more than one owner, we can't require everybody to live there. It
Right.
wouldn't make any sense.
We're going to run into that a lot of times.
Sure.
There's not going to be just single ownership,
The other thing you really need to think about, and, it's fine to require a residence on the property. That seems like an adequate request from the county's end. I agree that being the permit holder might be taking it at least a step too far in that situation. But it's one thing, you keep talking about lands up in the timberlands and all these different locations, and there's very few residents, legally permitted residents, in maybe some of these places we're talking about. And so the question poses back to the county, so what kind of permitting and costs is that going to require? Because you're talking about needing to get building permits and all this stuff to actually create a residence on property that isn't zoned that way, I guess. And so I'm not sure if in fact we get to the point where we're permitting commercial cannabis grows in these lands we've been talking about, TPZ lands, forest lands.
Yeah.
What's the requirement on the county's end to then create official residence there? Because if it's going to be a residence through this permitting process, it's going to have to be a full-on building permit with either a trailer or a built house or something of that nature, and then the whole
And
9 yards has
address
to be
and
permitted.
everything, yeah. I mean, I would come anyway, but my neighbor has a really nice house. There was no permits ever pulled for it. You know.
Heidi, what would you do with that if somebody's got an unpermitted house and then they want a use permit to do something else? Don't you make them come up to code?
Potentially. I mean, if we become aware of an unpermitted home, we could do a notice of violation, which would cloud the title on the property. I would, this is kind of a roundabout thing, but I'd probably end up calling up to your office, Joel, to to find out whether or not we could. I know that this is a topic that's coming up in other counties in the state as far as issuing permits to properties that have other compliance issues with other codes. And I guess I need to go back and kind of revisit what those responses have been. But again, I'd probably pitch it back to you.
Well, are you thinking maybe it's like a reasonable condition issue? Is there a reasonable relationship between the other, necessary permits?
Well, if the house is a condition in order to have the use and the house isn't permitted, yes, unless I missed something.
I always thought that even if it was totally unrelated, if we had if you wanted a use permit to put up a structure and you had an unpermitted structure next to it, that you'd make them come up to code. You'd make them get permits for everything. Am I wrong about that?
We would try. I don't know if the nexus between the two, if we can legally do that, again, which is what I would probably ask you, or I would ask you.
I've never thought about it.
Yeah,
Sounds fun. Let's hope it happens.
The county's dealt with it a little bit. I have a neighbor who, they bought a property that had nice structures built on them, but there was no permits ever pulled. And then when they bought the property, the assessor came up and saw everything and assessed everything, and now they got a big tax bill, and now it's all on the tax roll as if it was all permitted and everything. And I asked him, well, does that mean the county sees that now as a permitted structure, or is it just assessed? And he didn't know.
It's just assessed.
Right.
Yeah, the assessor's office does not share that information with us.
Gotcha.
So we are.
And I've heard of retroactive building permits being issued for double cost and what
Yeah, and
circumstances.
we have a process if we find unpermitted development
Right.
and someone would like to comply with the law. Yeah, we have a fee schedule. We have requirements as far as what type of information we need in order to ensure that it complies with the current building codes.
Got it.
Totally, and
Public
I
comment.
have to interject, I've been witnessing this very event transpire in other counties where they're saying, hey, we want to get these, guys in the TPZs to come into compliance, and that's a huge expense for them on top of their permitting fee, is say, hey, if I want to come into compliance, I'm going to have to permit my building that I didn't permit before, and that may or may not discourage them for applying for a permit. What they've done in Mendocino County and other counties is they create a new type of code for that building. It is hey, this is a dry structure for outdoor cannabis. Nobody lives in here. It's not worth thousands of dollars. We're going to create a code for that. It costs you $100 a year to have that, There's going to have to be new structural codes to allow this type of cultivation to come into compliance. And what the assessor has done in this county and other counties is come out and say, hey, this is not quite a house. It's not even close to being compliant. It is an accessory building, and it is going to increase your taxes to the county, but it is not going to devastate your farm or thus the cost of your property, and it will not up the value significantly. So creating a new code and working together with the people that want to permit their structures in order to be in complete compliance with the county would be best.
Thank you. Humboldt does something like that in their commercial cannabis land use ordinance. They have language that suggests that for purposes of this ordinance, this is not defined as a structure under California Building Code, and they're referring to small PVC hoop houses and things that are, for whatever reason they've been able to write their code where they don't have to consider them structures. I don't know how that works or how they wrote it, but something to that effect in order to either to extend grace periods for people to get with it, or as a permanent solution for things that are agricultural use only. I know in ag lands in Humboldt, I think there's a lot different building. You can build agricultural buildings without permits, I believe, to a certain size, provided they're just for an agricultural use. So there may be some mechanism like that. Yolo County gave 2 years to their permit applicants to get their things to code. You know, they let them use them for a season, and then gave them a period to get with it. So I don't know what the willingness of the county to do something like that is, or how complicated that is. So, to think on it for a while, probably.
Yeah, the residency is going to be something, residents on properties are going to be a big issue we have to talk about, because, I mean, if that's something that's going to, you know, be necessary to implement into the ordinance, we've got to talk about all those.
Well, trailer's a resident. I mean, I had approved manufactured trailer as a legal residence, and our county code already exempts the camping restrictions and trailer restrictions from the timberlands. I believe it's legal to park a trailer and call it a residence.
So it would just be waste disposal systems that people would have to.
Yes, I think part of our cultivation is going to include
yeah.
approved waste disposal systems, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, how would we feel, you know, just incentivizing, you know, living on site for a very small scale, you know, whether it's indoor or outdoor for that matter, you know, a 500 square foot live on site, you know, and you're.
That's what Humboldt did, right? 3,000.
Yeah, for their outdoor
feet
3,000 square
live
foot
on.
artisanal brand.
Yeah.
I don't know if they've modified that or not, but.
So, I mean, to focus on one thing that we can move forward with, it might be easier to write a law that allows it, you know, indoor on existing structures and on the grid. It might be more palatable to the board to do something small and outdoor and on timberland. But I think kind of got to pick one, and let's work on it.
Sure. Yeah, we got off on, outdoors not even on our agenda, we talked about it, but yeah, yeah, and definitely. And then if we're talking about, indoor is going to be different for residency requirements, obviously. If you have a manufacturing building operation, I don't think it makes sense to ask people to live there. But for outdoor, that's an issue. But for indoor, probably not part of the discussion, I would say, unless it's on ag land.
I was going to say,
maybe on ag land, then it's an issue. But
exactly.
Manufacturing, commercial property, maybe not so much. So yeah, let's talk about ag land. I wish Blake was going to be here because he's the champion of
the ag land?
Yeah, well, the champion for retaining the original character of the farmland and the farm community here, and that's been his primary concern with considering indoor cultivation on ag land. And when there was big money in it, you know, you could take a really beautiful piece of ag land, pasture land, and blow out the barn and forget about the land and neglect it and never use it for, you know, its original purpose as intended by the county and zoning and planning and all of that. So I think.
So does Blake personally have an opinion against indoor cultivation on ag land currently? Is that's kind of where he's feeling we should go, or how do you guys feel? Since I wasn't necessarily here.
We talked about the small.
I got the gist, but
we talked about the small tier, like which is goes all the way to 5,000 square feet. Well, besides the 500, you know, the small tier is 5,000. I don't know. He was pretty open to just listening. It sounded like, you know. We didn't really get to any decisions.
Okay. How do you feel about ag land indoor, Kurt?
Well, I was the one that was advocating for the fact that if we're going to include manufacturing zones and commercial zones on buildings, then why are we not including ag land buildings? Because it's essentially the same type of zones. And, I mean, oftentimes they abut each other even. They're right next to each other. And we're talking about the same types of buildings and the same types of structures and the same properties that are generally speaking not exactly next to people's houses, but I mean, we're still dealing with setbacks potentially, obviously. And it just seems like a lot of the same types of buildings and locations that we're trying to do stuff in, and in most cases even more further away from residents and whatnot, so they can become even more appropriate in those situations and have less conflicts with nuisances and whatnot. So I was all for, I guess, in some respects, mirroring whatever we're considering on M zones and C zone
for indoor cultivation,
available for ag zone property.
Okay. So including manufacturing on ag, is that
No, just we were talking about indoor cultivation on
Okay.
existing structures, and we were talking about in the C, what did we, C4 or something like
C4 and
that?
M.
And then M, and then, so why not also ag zoned?
Okay.
Because it's a lot of the similar type of buildings in the
I
similar types
agree.
of areas.
Yeah, I would just think with setbacks appropriate for ag land that, wouldn't necessarily have to be appropriate for C4 or M.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of.
Because those are just
C4
specific to that.
Yeah, and M
ag
zones
land.
that are just as close, if not as close as some ag zone properties
Yeah.
too. I mean,
Right.
I'm thinking of properties that I'm aware of, and I'm envisioning where the triplicate is in Smith River.
Yeah.
That zone, I think it's a M zone, not really, I can't really remember.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's
And so that piece of property comes right up to people's houses. I mean, literally, it abuts people's houses. And so,
Right.
I mean, there's just as many M zone properties that could become that you need these setbacks from as any other piece of property too.
Residential.
Specific to cultivation.
Yeah, specific, this is all specific to cultivation.
I agree, yeah, I agree
And then,
completely.
again, the reason why we all started talking about indoor specifically, and just to rehash kind of what we talked about before, maybe you weren't here, was that we kind of got pressed with last meeting that we've got to pick one and go for it. Otherwise, it's never going to become approved by the end of the year. And it just, in all respects, seems like the indoor cultivation is going to be the easiest as far as all of the things we have to talk about. As we started talking about the outdoor, and it seemed like there was all of these little roadblocks that we needed to think about, and the indoor it's so much more streamlined into what we've already kind of come forward with the retail. And it just is a little bit of a change, and
Makes perfect
maybe
sense
move
to
forward
move.
quickly with that, and then jump on to the next thing.
So did we have a size that, the 5,000 square foot was the appropriate size max for indoor cultivation? Or?
I think
talked
we
a
left
little
that
bit about
open. I think we left that open at the end of the last meeting to discuss size at
Okay.
this meeting. And one of the things was not to get too large.
Yeah. Yeah, we wouldn't want them being larger than our outdoor grows, I don't think, just because that just doesn't seem appropriate for the environment and given the climate zones that we have here.
Sure. I mean, there's various reasons to restrict it. I mean, the bigger you go, the bigger type of investment it is. That may or may not be good, Some people would like to see big capital investment come to the county, I don't like indoor as a principle. I think it's bad for the environment. I think it's sort of an abomination when you can use the sun. I do see appropriate times and places for indoor, absolutely, for experimental production, for off-season fresh production, and for really small scale, for doing things on a small scale. It makes sense. It brings opportunity for more people to come into the business when you allow small scale indoor cultivation. There's more places available, so you're going to get a greater number of individual entrepreneurs potentially with it. But I don't think it's appropriate over the long haul to use indoor for production, just general production, especially for if more than 50% of the market is extracts. That doesn't come from indoor economically, generally. That's got to come from outdoor. So there'll always be a market, indoor and outdoor, are different products entirely. I don't think they're to be compared with each other. I think they're very, very different products. And they're separate markets, I think. But I don't think it's a good idea to promote big aggressive uses of electricity. It's just against my religion.
So, refresh me if you know, Jesse, what are the tiered sizes for indoor cultivation?
500 for the cottage, and then it goes to 5,000 for the first
It jumps
small.
small
Yeah,
to
there
5,000,
isn't one in
between.
between unless there's been a change.
But we could restrict 5,000. We could go under 5,000. They would just
You have
pull
to
that
buy a permit,
right?
though. You have
Yeah.
to pay for
5,000.
5,000 feet
They'd be buying a
from the
state permit for bigger than use, and I don't know how expensive the 5,000 permit is. It's not a deal breaker just because we don't let them use their entire state allotment, but it's not
pretty
super
expensive.
fair.
It's pretty expensive. I'll look it up.
Are we aware of other municipalities that are doing just that, restricting the size, even though you still have to buy a state permit that goes up to 5,000, but the municipality saying you can only go up to 2,500?
The only thing I can think of is Humboldt's 3,000 for the artisanal, which would require, the $5,000 permit. But I don't know if they've kept that. I haven't looked at Humboldt in a while.
I think they did that for the 2,500 square foot tier was the point of the 3,000 Humboldt thing. And then Humboldt, you pay the taxes on what you're using, not what on your permit is. So you could have a 3,000-foot artisanal permit and cultivate 2,500 square feet. You pay taxes on 2,500 square feet.
I think 5,000, square feet's not too big. I think we could certainly incentivize a real small scale 500 square foot that, allows, an entry level participant to get in, maybe live on site. If we're on the indoor, just to kind of rehash, I think over and over we've kind of discussed if it's a small operation, and if it's filtered and vented correctly, that you really can't identify it until you're walking up on the door. And so I think really we're, I think we kind of, we're
low
at
impact.
500 and 5,000 square feet, and really we should be talking about, setbacks. So where's 500 appropriate, where's 5,000 appropriate?
I think the impact of it is, it's like manufacturing. It's hidden and out of sight. You may not even be aware of its existence on kind of any scale. I mean, I've seen gigantic warehouses with thousands of lights. You don't know it's there until you get in the building. So.
No, and I mean, the difference too between outdoor and indoor is that, in indoor you're getting 3 to 4 harvests a year, possibly even more. And so, when you multiply that over a year's production's worth, a 5,000 square foot indoor grow is going to give you 30,000 square foot potentially of harvestable material every year. For an outdoor grower, we're limiting our outdoor grows to 10,000 square foot or below. Outdoor growers, if we're getting into light depth, you might get to 20,000 square foot of potential harvestable canopy coverage for a year. So, we are looking at, with that 5,000 square foot grow, we're going to have more indoor production than we would outdoor production in terms of canopy coverage over a year's time. So that's just another thing to consider with, the indoor grows. They've got multiple harvests per year. Outdoors, 1 singular harvest or maybe 2 if you're really good, just for compliance sake.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
500 is too small for business. Like if you're,
Totally.
I wish there was like an in-between tier by the state, but it
Yeah.
is what it is. So I think 5,000 is what we should talk about. But
All right.
I'd like to discourage the county from talking about indoors over that size.
Yeah, me too.
Heidi, did you have a chance to think about the consistency of indoor cultivation on manufacturing land?
It doesn't appear to be a super great fit based on the existing language in our zoning and our general plan. I mean, I think that there are some elements of our general plan that we would have to change anyway as part of this whole process. And if in fact it is inconsistent, we could remedy at that time to make it fit.
What would you say is it about cultivation that is inconsistent with manufacturing?
All the uses that they refer to are very specific to making things, producing or processing, those types of things. There's nothing that has to do with growing.
Right, living
So
things.
from that part, I find the issue. The other part, which I think is consistent, is it's supposed to be for uses that have, odors or noise or those types of things, which could fit with
Right.
that aspect of it.
Sure.
So I think if you want to say one is a positive or negative aspect, I think the negative aspect is already covered in our ordinance.
Right.
It would just be listing it as an
Right.
additional activity.
I gotcha. Right. Maybe thinking of it this way, like an indoor cultivation, it is a lot like making things. I'm a machinist and I'm in manufacturing, and so I know, what the zone is for.
And I mean, it's something that we could bring back and everyone could take a look at. Obviously, we're going to have to make a decision on
Right.
it. But I think if you want to be very explicit as
Right.
far as it being allowable,
You'd have to include
we
that
would,
in
we
there
would,
as a
we would
use.
want to add it to the list. But I don't know if that's really that big of a deal,
I see.
if that's a location that we want to have it.
It seems
So-
similar to like making cheese or yogurt. You've got living biology going on that you're culturing and growing. It may not be a plant, but you're culturing a bacteria, and then you're making something out of it, So it's like it's not too far of a stretch to say if you have a living plant that you're utilizing to manufacture something.
The Coastal Commission recommends that we decide and define clearly whether cannabis is an agricultural use.
Oh,
If we are going to say that it's actually a manufacturing use, indoor cultivation is, then Heidi, what do you think that does to our ability to put it on ag land? Do we have,
I think we would be in a conflict there.
is there any manufacturing, any amount of manufacturing with use permit on any ag land?
Not that I am aware of. I'm just trying to think of if that would have been something that would require a use permit, and in that case, I can't think of anything. Maybe some of our local folks who might be involved in agricultural activities may know of some maybe legal non-conforming type activities manufacturing on ag land, but I don't know.
Trying to think of, I don't know the specific zonings, but I'm fairly certain there is, but I don't know the zoning.
I mean, we really don't have a whole lot of manufacturing per se. I mean, we have the stuff that happens on Timbers
Right.
Boulevard, and which is in a manufacturing zone, and I mean, we used to have our mill sites, and those were on manufacturing zones. That's mostly what
Right.
our remnant manufacturing zones are
right.
actually from.
So stuff on ag's probably like agricultural processing more than like manufacturing, maybe things that are going on that maybe.
We have a zone district in the coastal zone called AI, Ag Industry. Yeah, and it really takes only in a couple of parcels, large parcels, but
Okay.
that would definitely probably be something that would fit the definition of what we're looking at, where you both blending the two.
Okay.
Well, maybe creating a new zone or only doing it in ag industrial and then having people rezone. Because we're still going to have our problem with Klamath. You know, we're still going to have to find a way to restrict it somehow.
I mean, if we're looking at having to reinvent everything, I mean, as far as allowing cultivation in existing structures in the ag zone, I mean, I think that's an easier road to go than looking at the manufacturing. I mean, if it's an either or.
Yeah, I don't know that it's an either or. I'm just kind of thinking out loud.
So the Coastal Commission wants you to decide if it's an ag thing or a manufacturing thing for everywhere?
They don't say that much.
Oh, okay.
They have a list of things that they'd like to see. And one of the reasons they want to see it defined or not defined as ag use is because that will dictate whether it's going to be principally permitted.
Oh.
If you really define it as agricultural use, then they're really, you know,
Right.
it's kind of not really development anymore. So that's why the Coastal Commission cares.
Yeah, if you define it as agricultural use, I mean, federally, they're not talking about it as agricultural use, but when the state or the municipality defines it as agricultural use, I would assume the Coastal Commission has a lot harder time telling you no. Because ag lands, whether they're in Coastal Commission zones or not, are principally, the owners are principally permitted to participate in agricultural practices. That's what the property is zoned for, and it's part of the Farm Act and all of these things that come all the way down from the federal government. So there's probably a little bit of a backwards looking at it, that one would assume by the Coastal Commission. The municipality saying it's ag use. Coastal Commission is probably way more allowable for it to become.
So if we don't define it as an ag use, and it's going to be a use permit, which I think is definitely what we've been talking about and should do, there's some things that Coastal would like to see, like protections of agricultural uses. They don't want you kind of over time. What they specifically talk about is vertical integration. If you're going to allow more than just growing, and it slowly seeps into, you know, taking the land out of traditional ag land into something else. They don't want to see that kind of slow transition.
That's what Blake's talking about with this, with the use of ag land.
And just so I can catch up real quick, the ramifications of the county classifying cannabis as an agricultural product are just within the use permit, and so if we define it as an agricultural product, it's a specified
Does it become principally
Does it become
permitted just by
principally
defining it
permitted
that?
on
Or
ag land?
can we still require a use permit even though it's defined as an agricultural
I
thing?
think we could still do it. It just starts to get weird, you know. It starts to get into your right to farm act. It gets
Right.
into these, is it development in the, it gets into stuff.
We gotta just let
makes
you
things
figure
harder.
that out. That's beyond our,
There's also, you know, when I say that, I mean, there's probably also unintended consequences of defining as ag that, you know, I don't want to see what they are. I want
So
to
there-
find out what they are.
There hasn't been many localities in the state that have done that, have there? Yeah, I don't think.
I don't
Seems
know how
like
they
it seems
define
like a
it.
new
too.
question.
I haven't-
I've never seen this in any of the
Yeah.
things I've read throughout the state over the last year and a half or so.
Yeah, I
about
haven't seen it.
talking, so that it seems like
I've heard
maybe
it from the
that's a
state
new-
level, you know, where they were talking about it at the state level,
Yeah.
trying to redefine it.
Humboldt went all around, starting out with requiring it on prime ag and then not, you know, and kind of
And where they
not
stand,
wanting it on prime
where do they
ag.
stand now on ag land in Humboldt? They allow it.
I'm
for
not
any-
sure. Well, yeah, it is allowed. It's just
Yeah.
not as, they were pushing it to their, but I kind of quit following Humboldt's giant mess.
So do you think if we allow it, Joel, on ag land with indoor cultivation, there is a way to circumvent or at least help with the coastal commission process, you know? I mean, is that?
I think if we do it with a use permit, you know, it's going to be development. It's going to go through the coastal requirements. They're going to want to see our ordinance protecting certain things. And there's this list that I have here. It's kind of proposed. It's not a final thing yet, but you know, they want to see kind of percentage of the land that's going to be allowed for cannabis. If there's going to be vertical integration, they want to see, you know, that it's clear that those other non-ag uses are accessory uses, and a certain amount of the cannabis grown there is going to be used there. They want to see that it's going to use existing infrastructure, existing roads, existing sewer, electricity, whatever you've got, not on steep slopes. They don't want it on timberland. I don't know if we have that much timberland in the coastal zone, Heidi, but they don't. Frankly, they don't want it there.
No, we have some CT coastal timber and we have some TPZ, but it's mostly, there's some in the Fort Dick area and there would be some in the Elk Creek watershed.
And so one thing they say is to direct non-soil dependent cultivation, so greenhouses or retail facilities, to non-agricultural areas or areas where existing agricultural uses are already severely limited by urban uses. So I think they don't, I mean, the thrust is they don't want us to supplant other agriculture with cannabis.
Do we know of a specific percentage of number that they're comfortable with converting to cannabis use versus, or is it just fairly like we just don't want to see it, you know, 10%, 15%?
Yeah, it just says specific percentages. I think ultimately they don't want you transitioning out of ag land.
They don't want to see it on ag land.
They really don't want to see it on ag land. Although they have actually permitted, I think it was Santa Cruz County or Santa Clara County, to do outdoor in ag. So, I mean, maybe they're loosening from what they're.
Carpinteria's operations are totally in the coastal zone.
What up?
Carpinteria,
Yeah.
big expanse of greenhouses.
They're
South-
outdoor?
Yeah. The company that got them, you know, whatever,
25
acres and
billion.
acres. Right. So I found the fee schedule here, and it changed a lot. Round 2 of the regs, they jacked the fee schedule up like 10 times in some places.
Yep.
So specialty indoor is a $2,000 permit roughly. That's the 500 square feet. And then, well, that's specialty cottage rather. And then specialty, which is the 5,000, it's a $20,000 permit. So you need to use every inch of your space probably.
And that's just the indoor.
That's for the
Space schedule,
5,000
yeah.
square foot. 500 to 5,000 is a $20,000 permit, whatever your size in between there. So, yeah, you want to be consistent with the county size with the state. It does matter. It's a big enough fee that you got to use it. And then to compare that to 2,500 square foot outdoor, that's a specialty outdoor. It's a $2,500 permit, so it's one tenth of the cost of the indoor, which about equates, well, I don't know, indoor production's maybe 5 times for the space, but that's half the size of a permit, so that metrics out just right. It's 10 times because it's a permit that's half the size, and then
I mean, they calculated within those fee schedules the potential for multiple harvests on an indoor scale.
And then the mixed light, they changed the definition of that. Even if you don't use any lights, you got to buy the mixed light license, and that changes to
that's just if you're going to grow.
6,000.
That's just for T5s too. Even if you're only rolling, like using T5 lights to grow your veggie starts or your cannabis starts for the season, you're a mixed light now.
So it's 2.5 times more for the mixed light, which is 2.5 crops a year, right? Okay.
So, I mean, a majority of our ag land is within the coastal zone, correct? And so, I mean, this is something that if we're going to talk about indoor production on ag land, we obviously have a CEQA.
Nurseries too are, I think, probably actually the more suitable use for
or coastal commission
ag land would be the nursery license.
That's what we had talked about earlier. I mean, that had been a lot of bulk of our discussions.
I'd like to see it restricted to that, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, for the ease of stuff, I mean, I guess, you know, if we're trying to make it easy for everyone to get involved, it makes sense to stick to a nursery thing. But I don't want to preclude the opportunity for agricultural lands to produce cannabis. I mean, you know, I think that we do have, you know, the potential for, again, small cottage, you know, artisanal production of indoor cannabis in our agricultural zones. If it becomes too difficult to do, I mean, then that's something we have to discuss.
Let's talk about impact. Kurt and I disagree with how many people it takes to competitively maximize a 5,000 square foot operation.
In terms of employees?
In terms of employees. Let's say you're producing your own plants, you know, and so you have like maybe a 10 or 15,000, maybe a 10,000 square foot facility to be able to have a 5,000 square foot canopy.
Processing and curing rooms.
And all of this stuff. So I think that's when you're talking about whether or not to put on ag land, we're talking about impact. You know, how many people does it take? That could be a lot of people. I think to really run one to its max, you're talking like, I don't know, maybe
5 to 10 people.
You're right. That's what
5
I'm
to 10
thinking.
people, I would think, would be, you know, I mean.
So is that okay?
From operations that I know of, you know, in other states too.
So you have 5 or 10 people coming and going to work every day, and maybe a few deliveries every day. You know, is
it's going to
that
be
suitable for where we're talking about the roads, the neighborhood, you know, like residential areas that are next to manufacturing areas, I think you give those different considerations than you do residential areas that are next to agricultural zones. You might expect agricultural things, but you don't necessarily expect to see lots of traffic necessarily. I don't know.
I've lived next to ag lands. I'm used to lots of traffic. Just
Sure.
comes at times.
I mean, if someone is actually using their agricultural property, which isn't happening in the vast majority of this county,
Then you have
there's
lots
lots
of
of traffic on those
Lots of
properties.
employees
You're
every
talking
day,
about 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 people maybe for weeks on end
Sure.
in properties.
Okay.
I'm thinking of the ag zone properties, trying to think through a lot of them. I mean, there's perfectly suitable infrastructure, county roads to most all ag properties. You're talking about the actual roads on the private properties themselves may not all be paved and whatnot, but most of them are suitable roads for driving on. But again, there's a lot of non-utilized ag property in this county because there's nothing that they can do with them that's feasible and viable. And
sounds like good diversity then to like put farms to work for their intended purpose.
Yeah. So, Joel, how hard, I mean, and again, this is just your opinion, I would suppose, how hard do you think it would be to include indoor on ag land, given the Coastal Commission thing? I mean, do you think it's something possible that you can work up in language that helps that process? Or
there's some ag land that's
eases?
not Coastal Commission too.
There is some, but it's very minimal. I mean, I think I remember when we looked at the maps, it's like 10% of ag lands, you know, outside of the Coastal Commission. The rest is all within the purview of that.
There's some ag land out South Fork.
Yeah, most, yeah, there is. There's, I mean, it's most property, and pretty much if you're thinking of the highway as a dividing line, you can pretty well visualize most ag properties on the
left side.
On the west side of the highway being coastal zoned, not all of them, but some of them. You know, Kings Valley area has ag zone properties, I believe, all out throughout there that are not utilized, and out Elk Valley and whatnot.
I mean, so is there, I mean, because you're much more aware of how much ag land we have, Kurt. So, I mean, could we say, okay, you know, ag land that's not in coastal commission purview can do indoor cultivation?
I would assume the coastal commission has nothing to say about ag land outside of the coastal
right,
commission.
exactly. So I mean, is there enough in your opinion, because you're the Smith River ag, you know, representative almost, and Robert, is there enough ag land to make it worth it to just, you know, X out coastal commission ag land and just include the ag land that isn't in coastal commission? Or does that just lock out too much of our space?
Well, there's a lot of space,
okay,
and a lot of viable non-utilized buildings and whatnot throughout all of these ag zone properties that you'd be Xing out. And so the question just really boils down to, is it really going to be that much of a hurdle to deal with the coastal commission independently on those that zoning? I mean, are we simply just needing to talk through it with the coastal commission, and then they're going to shoot you back with, this is what we want to see, and you shoot them back with, this is what we're going to do, and it's not a whole lot different than the coastal commission zoning on the commercial and whatnot that we're already kind of looking into, that we're talking about them taking maybe quote unquote months, maybe longer to get your permit, but it's still a process that we work through. And so
what do you think about
I would think we would want to still include that process for those zoned properties.
Okay.
That's on the permit applicant.
Whether it gets denied in the process of the coastal commission is a different thing.
Just be kind of a case-by-case basis. Then
Yeah,
just
I mean,
allow
if you wanted to undertake that thing and go through the whole process of trying to work with the coastal commission and taking months more than your counterpart across the road.
As an applicant permittee, if you're willing to undertake that.
If the county is willing to help with that process, then I would think the county should step up and do that.
It doesn't really massively complicate the ordinance to allow an applicant who's in the coastal zone to go through that process.
So there's two things. There's the ordinance that we do have to get certified, and that's where we're going to go back and forth with coastal.
Okay.
But I think we can.
Ordinance as a whole.
The ordinance as a whole, for the part that affects the coastal zone.
That's why you have two ordinances, coastal and non-coastal.
Yeah, and so this would be a negotiation, but they have approved outdoor and indoor. They have indoor on agricultural zoning in Monterey and outdoor on prime ag in San Luis Obispo. So we know it's possible. I don't know how their ag land compares to ours and the issues. That'll all be, you know, something we'll go back and forth with. But it's possible. It's going to take longer, you know, but it's possible. I don't think that we need to, you know, give up on it. I think there will be something that the Coastal Commission will let us do eventually.
So are you saying that there's basically we need to make two different ordinances essentially? Like one ordinance that just governed all these properties that are outside of the Coastal Commission zone? Our
whole, like, the county code has two chapters, a coastal zoning and a regular zoning. And so we'll no matter what.
Almost every ordinance
so
is like
you've done the same thing then, and maybe I completely missed it on the retail is the same way basically?
Yeah, it'll be the same way.
Yeah, so that makes sense to me.
Yeah, that makes
now
sense to me.
they could be identical, and then one goes to coastal and comes back not identical anymore.
So, right. So one of them doesn't get held up in the process.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So the thing that's probably going to happen first is whatever is on non-coastal, you know, assuming ag land here.
Cool. All right. So it kind of sounds like small tier, specialty tier is suitable for ag land potentially, pending more discussion. Hopefully Blake will be here next time. Tell us why it's not a good idea.
It would be good to get his feedback on how he feels about that, but I'm sure.
I mean, the residential setbacks from ag, we haven't gotten into that. 100 feet, 1,000 feet, a mile. What do you think?
I think a mile's too far.
Me too.
I'm
thinking from the building, maybe not from a property line. Like if you have a building on ag land, we measure from a building.
Well, I think that some of our biggest controversy that's been in the room has
Yeah.
been the people.
On Church Tree.
Yeah, on Church Tree, so you would have to use that kind of as
Sure.
an exhibit of how far that
Right.
it needs to be away at least, because that's right almost next to the road as they're driving up. So 100 feet, is that
It's not enough.
too? Yeah, it's not enough.
Well, I don't know the specific breakdowns of all these different ag properties, because there's tons of them, right? But in general terms, most ag lots are quite large. And so, like you're saying, you probably don't want to be metricing it and measuring it property line to property line, because you could be bordered up to a 300-acre parcel, and just because that piece of parcel butts up to a residential zone doesn't mean that the other end of that parcel is with a unit on it, a structure on it, isn't just perfectly fine, right? So.
Well, the Church Tree situation is outdoor cultivation anyway, right?
Yes,
in a
that is,
greenhouse.
because that was in a greenhouse. So if we're not doing outdoor cultivation, that issue would be eliminated.
What we
And then
have
I'll-
instead is visual resources, right?
That's
Because
correct.
Church Tree
and
people
then-
don't want to see a building of any kind,
And
probably.
I think I may have already asked this question, but indoor cultivation with the proper ventilation, et cetera, how far is that going to create an off-site impact?
Well, you can do it so that it doesn't have an offsite impact, but
I mean,
but they weren't, I thought that they were defining indoor as no emitting of light, but
Yes,
that's
it
not
is.
true.
It's not?
No, it has
Really?
to do with the amount of light you're using.
The wattage.
Ah.
Yeah, and that's what defines it as indoor. It's to prevent you from getting a mixed light license and then
just
growing
growing
indoor and letting the light leak out.
Yes.
If you're in a greenhouse
Or
and
mixed
you're
light.
using some light, you're technically
mixed
not indoor either. But it has to do with the amount of wattage you use per square foot as far as the state metrics it.
Well, then we need to decide if we want to use that same
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we could
yeah,
in our
indoors-
code, in our county code, we could implement some sort of light leakage ordinance language in there to prevent light leakage, because I think that would be a big concern
We could
for a lot
define
of these.
indoor as non-emitting light, I think,
Yeah, I
probably.
think, I mean, I'm sure that would be more of a question for Joel, but I mean, I believe that if
Right.
we allow for it with the light leakage, we're going to have significant nuisance calls to
Yeah,
the
I
county,
agree.
because that's going to be a very
agree.
big, I mean, I've driven up, to large-scale greenhouses that emit all of the light outside of that in the middle of the night, and these things
Right.
are lighting up.
Oh, yeah,
in
we can't have
valleys.
that.
You can't have
So I
that.
think the only issue being new buildings then,
Yeah.
like, so what the issues we're talking about with residential would be if somebody's putting up a new building just for cannabis in a place where now it's an eyesore. But existing buildings on ag land seem really ideally suited because you're already seeing them and you definitely can mechanically eliminate effects from the outside, odor, most of the noise,
Yeah.
and light for sure. Odor requires constant maintenance and cost to control, but it is doable.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing we kind of discussed last meeting, right, and you weren't here, was just, it seemed very difficult to try to put a specific on how you control the smell. There's
Or
not
how much can it
There's
smell
not a
outside.
real specific,
Yeah, there's not a nose
you
meter.
must use this, and you must
Yeah.
use that, and this is all that stuff. So it becomes a little more arbitrary as to who's deciding if the smell is being.
We're gonna have the smell
taken
commission
care of.
decide.
I mean, there are standard mathematical equations for, odor control, with certain CFM,
Sure.
percentages and fans, and the sizing of your filter systems on the,
Sure.
the output.
It's already in county code, though, like in places
yeah.
you can't emit.
Yeah.
It says, whatever, odors.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bigger thing would be, under that nuisance thing where people are smelling or hearing or whatnot, I think it's the light leakage. I mean, that's gonna be,
Right.
that'll be the largest complaint if we allow it to leak out, because that's what everybody's gonna see driving down the highway. You're gonna see, blazing 15,000 watts of light just blazing out from underneath these, greenhouses that are indoor. because they're
right.
using, they're going to use the sunlight when they can to help them, but they're also going to just blaze these lights, 18 hours a day. They're going to go on until 10 at night.
Yeah, we can't define that as indoor.
No.
That'll be the mixed light challenge to tackle, like how to deal with that, so.
Yeah, so we were just talking about light leakage for indoor. I suppose now what Jesse and
How to
Kurt were
define
saying,
smell, too.
the state doesn't define indoor as being necessary inside of a closed structure. It's about the amount of wattage you use. So with that, if we allow for indoor cultivation in ag land, somebody builds a greenhouse, we don't have language in there to control light leakage, we're going to have big, bright agricultural fields.
Could define it as enclosed, right? No light leakage out.
Or, I mean, that's not ag land specific, this is.
Yeah, it wouldn't be, no, exactly, it
people
wouldn't be
and it's
specific to
just-
ag, it
it's
would be
basically
anywhere.
somebody using
Yeah.
their buildings or
Yeah.
however they've acquired the building built.
I mean,
into
could we require,
light out.
I do believe there are local jurisdictions that have required indoor growing to be in a solid
Yeah, you could
building.
just define it
An enclosed,
differently.
solid built,
Yeah.
framed building.
I guess one thing we do is just not allow mixed light use, right? You're either outdoor or you're indoor, and if you're indoor, you're.
I thought about that too, like well, there's different tiers of mixed light. It's called mixed light even if you're not using lights, and then there's another one where if you're using lights and different thresholds of wattage. But you could eliminate the tiers of mixed light that include lights.
Yeah, the concern I have, as being someone who, wants to do outdoor growing is that, to get a jump start on the season, you need lighting because cannabis is photosensitive. So you extend the light period during the early seasons to get, greater growth before you plant outside. And so mixed light, considering the fact now that the state defines, say, your just vegging lights, or your extended light cycle lights, which, for myself, very minimal lights. We use fluorescent lights, we don't use large lights, but we would then be considered a mixed light. And so that would throw into, a little
It is an issue
confusion.
in the neighborhoods, not neighborhoods, but in where there's outdoor growing with mixed light, is that controlling that, and there's some efforts to require blackout tarping so you're not emitting light at certain times, but enforcing that, going in there and say, oh, well, that guy's way over wattage, and it's the line of sight's blaring in my window across whatever, so that adds a huge layer of complication, and I could see at least in the first round, but we're getting off of indoor, but when we talk about outdoor, I would say maybe that could be a solution though for the first round, to just not include the mixed light with lights category, and then you don't have to separately define indoor, I suppose.
Well, okay, so what we're talking about right now is indoor, enclosed structure, no light emitting.
Right,
And we can worry about the other stuff.
right. Okay. All right, public comment.
My comment was more involved with the, I would discourage eliminating the mixed light permits because there'd be too many code violations because you need light to start these outdoor gardens, and it would just create a whole rabbit hole to go down. So the mixed light permits.
Like people breaking the rules,
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
Sure.
You need it. So there needs to be more leeway and more just general understanding of what it takes to run these operations. I think the mixed light on ag land is actually like a really important license that would be viable. And I think that they kind of, they interplay, the full sun and they need light. So I guess if you use any wattage, you're mixed.
What do you think about light emitting in a situation like that bothering a neighbor's residence?
I mean, personally, if it was me, I would want the ideal situation, and what seems to be really successful around the state, most cost-effective, considering, is that the mixed light crosses a threshold of indoor-outdoor, especially in a place like this where, look, it's gray out. It's August. This is prime crop production time for cannabis right now, and it's gray. So ties into what I said last week. It's not, in fact, prime outdoor. Certain little areas are, sure, like this other gentleman had said. But in general, the mixed light becomes an important permit to have viable outdoor production. And yeah, the light nuisance, sure, you could look at a bunch of counties around the area, and because of the nature of the ag land that's available, yeah, it could be a nuisance, so maybe you come up with some sort of a concept of how to, yeah, like a light leakage clause, you know? So if you're going to use your lights at night for your vegetative cycles, then you make sure that your structure is
Right.
is
Some
effective.
enforcement problem, though, is having a no mixed
Sure.
light, and then people
Sure.
run lights anyway. People don't pull their tarps out to, you know, until somebody comes and complains. It's a lot of work to go black out your
Sure.
lights, you know. So my neighbors don't do it until I call and tell them to. So.
But then you have the forest TPZ zones, and it's like someone with the TPZ zone permit, they're not worried about really, there's not going to be residential issues.
Sure.
So there's a lot of layers to it, but I think that eliminating the mixed light permit is a foolish step, in my opinion, because that's almost an ideal permit. Sure, what indoor grower wouldn't want to be able to use a little bit of sunlight to supplement their cost and their effectiveness, and just to get the proper spectrum of light, et cetera. So maybe the concept of is a greenhouse an indoor, and on ag lands, aside from just existing structures, would greenhouses then also be considered indoor on ag lands?
Right.
Then what would that look like? Sizing, permitting, I mean, a 5,000 square foot greenhouse you need multiple daisy chain greenhouses to create that. But a 500 to 1,000 square foot greenhouses. And then, Mike, I had one question. What are the specifications of size greenhouses for mixed light? Is there a specification?
No, the licenses are just by square footage, and so you can divide that up into one large, I mean, there's million square foot greenhouses, one
Sure.
greenhouse, clear span. So you could do it any number of small greenhouses or one space. Yeah, and there's different metrics on how you set up your cultivation plan. But I'm definitely not an expert on how CDFA is defining the space. I think there's a way to allow space in between your operations and then have them fenced off and considered separate cultivation areas, and then you don't get taxed on the space between. But I'm not fully schooled yet on those details. I'll be working with Ag Department, hopefully, figuring it out. They'll be out there with their tape measure, maybe.
So let's, the light emitting issue here is what I'm talking about, right? There's a really simple way to deal with that, and that's just simply talking about not emitting light during certain hours. That allows innovative structures which allow translucent roofs to allow
For ambient light.
ambient sunlight during the day, and allows them to supplement light during other times with blacking out that roof. I mean, it's a really common greenhouse structure that allows these wattages of light that's going to exceed and become indoor production, but they still have blackout potential to eliminate light from seeping out of the facility. So it's just maybe talking about the not being a quote-unquote enclosed structure that doesn't allow sunlight in, but more so talking about not letting just a structure that doesn't let light out during a certain period of time.
I would be totally for indoor learning how to use the sunlight more. You know, I mean, I think it's something that unfortunately is, you know, cannabis production was pushed indoors because of the war on drugs. You know, it was forced on a lot of growers to just basically be in an enclosed structure. Nobody can hear you, nobody can smell you, nobody knows you're there. And I think, you know, the indoor cultivators could learn a lot from using the sun in relation to their, truthfully, if we're going to allow indoor cultivation, I would prefer to see indoor having to use sunlight on a percentage basis, whether it be, you know, timing schedule or whatnot. But I just believe that, yeah, you know, the biggest concern I think we're going to get from indoor cultivation if we allow it in greenhouses in the open like that is going to be the light leakage thing, because that's the most visual. You know, people can smell certain things, but everybody sees big bright lights.
Public comment.
Heidi had a question about the distance that an indoor grow is affected by whatever it may be. I would like that question answered for her. Thank you.
Miles and miles.
I thought we
and
did.
miles. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, zero, anywhere from 0 to, I mean, if you control it effectively, an indoor But so you're asking the other side, if it's not controlled, how far away? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I guess my point was, because we were, or not point, I wasn't making it, what I was trying to figure out, because we were talking about setbacks, if there was no negative impact from it, is a setback really that important?
Sure, yeah, like, you can do it so that there isn't any negative impact from it while it's operating. I guess the impact I was bringing up would be traffic for the operation, impact of operating a commercial operation in a place where it's not traditionally happening. But it sounded, when I asked that question, the ag guys here said, there's times where you're going to have a lot of people on ag land working it,
Yeah.
So the difference, I think, a little bit here is that the right to farm, right? And so we're not dealing with the right to farm and do with your ag property that residents have no control over, right? It's like, I have a right to farm cattle on an ag zone property, whether it's 2 feet from your house or not. That's the zone, and you chose to live there, and this is my ag zone, and I can do that, right? And so, but we're not dealing with that. We're dealing with cannabis, and we have the ability to rein it in a little bit more, I've run a greenhouse with lights that you could see for miles all night long, and it was, agricultural commodity in the greenhouse, and there's no, I guess, there's no law in the county that says you couldn't emit light, and so, the light was blaring until 11 o'clock at night, because that's what it takes to keep the plants growing properly. But we're not dealing with agricultural crops, so we're dealing with that. I mean, we have a lot of other things like cattle. The lights are on all night long in the feedlots. But again, so
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, truthfully, if cannabis hadn't been, so demonized for the last 30 or some odd years, we wouldn't really be talking about light emitting from a greenhouse. I mean, we're dealing with generational issues here that preclude the birth of us, and that's kind of, I think that's the twofold problem that we've got is we understand from our experiences that the reality of it is, I mean, it's truly an agricultural product. It's a plant, but
we have to take care of it differently.
But we have to take care of it differently, unfortunately.
Political considerations here and cultural considerations that, like you said, because of the history of the legality around it. So it's all, just like we're with retail, we were trying to find sideways ways of restricting the number that may not even make sense, but just trying to find legal ways of restricting it. And I think that's where Blake comes from. Let's find like weird, strange, but legal ways of restricting it that they may or may not actually make technical sense, but it works politically. There's all these political considerations that we have the technical conversations here, and then blend that with political, cultural realities at the same time.
No, there's really probably, in my mind, there's probably 2 ways really that we can go about trying to define and encompass the conversation of indoor cultivation. We're either going to deal with it on the state level of its wattage per square, per square foot, and then we need to talk about not emitting light from said structure for certain periods of the time, or we've got to go about it to talk about it being a completely enclosed structure, period.
Mm-hmm.
Because the state is not talking about being a completely enclosed structure, period. The state is talking about it being a just wattage, square foot deal.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in my mind, you got to do one of the 2 things, because eventually, if you talk about it, for example, as just being a completely enclosed structure that completely does not let light out, then when you walk down the next route of outdoor production or mixed light production or whatever we talk about next, then we have to look at allowing that type of scenario in there. And so it is, and then that's going to metric into what the state calls indoor production with those permits. So
I think we're gonna need mixed lighting, but I think maybe we just should, with indoor, say it doesn't emit light, and move on, you know, and, because then we're gonna be talking about outdoor, maybe mixed lighting, and then put that on as a separate agenda, then maybe, you know, we
I
just
agree.
don't.
Starting more simple and more restrictive, even if it's not going to work long-term. We've kind of been doing that all along in order to get things going. Where I think that light emitting from things is going to be controversial. It's going to be difficult to figure out how to deal with it, to figure out what the rules around it are going to be, and it's not going to be good for getting this done quickly.
I also think we need to temper any expectations on that is because of enforcement issues. A lot of those problems are going to be when none of the departments who would enforce that potentially will have anyone on duty.
Right.
So
You're not going to be calling the sheriff for a
morning,
business
the
and
lights are
profession
flaring.
code violation.
Exactly.
They're not going to care. They're not.
Exactly.
Right. They're going to say, call the regulators in the morning. Right.
yeah, code enforcement and ag aren't working at 9:30 when you're
Yeah.
having issues with your neighbor's lights keep you from going to sleep.
I think if we, when we discuss mixed lighting, you know, we might have to just, you know, also discuss, you know, a fee, fine schedule, you know, for, you know,
Infractions.
right, I mean, you know, but I think, you know, for today, we got indoor on here, and you know, I think mixed lighting can be, you know, maybe next agenda, you know.
All right.
So defining in there that you're not emitting light, period.
Yeah. I mean, which I think it's, you know, it's doable with the greenhouse. I mean,
Well, it's
you know,
doable in any
yeah,
scenario.
It's any
I
scenario.
was
It's
just thinking, you know, if we were talking about trying to say it can only be in a building that you can't even see in from the
Totally.
roof.
It does
top,
lend
side,
itself to the
otherwise-
potential conflicts as we move forward with other stuff.
Yeah.
I agree completely. I mean, I'd prefer to not have the discussions about those infinite small little details, because I don't see an issue with it, but I do know that, you know, there's public opinion and lots of other things to weigh, but yeah, no light leakage, you know, ag indoor 5,000 square foot, no light leak, no odor, you know, odor control measures implemented. 2 ordinances, one for coastal commission and one for non-coastal commission.
Heidi, what's the regular building setback on ag land?
Yeah, that would be the only thing we haven't talked about.
Just 5 feet?
It depends. No, I mean, for example, if the building has animals, it's going to be a greater distance from a property line, but I would need to bring it up. I can look it up in just a minute and give you some just for a general ag. Do you want a coastal, say like an A5 or A20 in coastal? That would probably be our most predominant
Yeah.
zone designation.
I'm thinking whether or not it smells at all. When you get to the board and you get to the public, they're going to want to see a setback.
Yeah.
Well, you need clearances around property lines and structures anyways. I mean, just so you can get, you know, movable equipment around the side of a greenhouse, you'd have to have it separated from a property line. Minimum, just
I'm
for
thinking,
that.
I'm thinking that we should be dealing with a property line setback as
Right.
maybe a more of a minimal number, but
Yeah.
then additionally looking at a metric
Residences.
of, from the structure to, yeah, I mean, additional residents or additional buildings or something like that.
I think we have to watch out for too with that. If you have structures on the adjacent property, I'm thinking specifically at ag lands here, up in Smith River, I can tell you from all the inspections I do up there that you have a lot of places where there'll be some old shed right on the edge of someone's property, right next to a lily bulb field or something. And we're trying to figure out, is this thing occupied or what's going on? So that's something to consider when we're doing this too. It's good to specify occupied dwelling versus just a structure.
Like
Setbacks
50
from
feet.
residences, residential
100 feet.
structures, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Right. For indoor buildings, we're talking
Indoor
about, yeah,
buildings.
1,000 feet's too far,
Greenhouses.
maybe 100 feet, maybe, I don't know.
A couple hundred feet.
200.
100 feet from a property line, maybe? I'm trying to.
I'm thinking maybe we could even vary it depending on if it was an existing structure, if it's one that we're building new. You know.
Sure.
You know, maybe an existing structure, there's not much of a setback, not much is changing, you
Does
know.
that make sense?
100 feet from a property line, and I'm just picking numbers, if 500 feet from a residence or something like that, or 1,000 feet from a residence? Like a
Why
physical
property
residence as
lines,
opposed to
though?
a structure?
Why property lines, though, like on a 1,000-acre ag parcel? Why are we talking about property line setbacks?
Solely, in my opinion, solely because if you had let's say you had 1,000 acre parcel, like you're saying, and so you picked and you put that, or that structure was right in the corner, right up next to the property line, which borders.
What's the building setback is for? Like, let's say you had 200 feet on the building, and it's kind of not relevant what's around the borders of your property if, you know, a quarter mile away on the other end of your parcel. Who cares what's going on over there? It's more about the setback from the building itself.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say.
No, I get you.
In Smith River, it could be though, because if this was a situation where someone was growing and they had employees in there, and then one of the bulb growers needs to make an application, one of their fields, and someone sets this grow up right on the property border, that's going to affect spray zone restrictions or buffer zones for the lily bulb growers. So that's just a specific kind of Smith River issue that
Okay, so setback from another ag's, okay, so you could have, the building has to be a setback from your own property line, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's the simplest,
Okay.
like any other building setback, you know,
Right.
200 feet from all of your property lines.
But what about the building setback from residential residences? That's what I was thinking of, is how far does a building need to be from your neighbor's residence? Is that a separate number?
That's what I was getting at. I was getting at, like, on your own property, like, it can't be right on your property line, so there's some small number that it needs to be away from your own property line.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then additionally, a metric of how far on your property that needed to be from an existing residence, let's say.
Heidi,
Because all of these manufacturing zones, all these zones do abut in some shape or form in some places, residents.
Have we talked about minimum lot size? I mean,
A few meetings ago we were talking about 10 or 20 acres.
well,
Okay.
isn't ag minimum 5?
there is a 5, there's an egg 5, and there's an egg 20, and we have AE, egg exclusive, which is 40. So it just depends on where you're located. I'm just thinking the A5, for example, in the Fortic area along Moorhead, those are a lot of hobby farms, a lot of residential development in conjunction with, so those would be areas where we might be more inclined to see some conflicts if we didn't.
Are those called rural ag, rural RA? Are those, okay, it's not, it's just
No, they're
ag,
A5.
principal,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, those are specifically locations that, why we would need these metrics, because those are not specific to any one property, but those are potential hotspots for places like this. They do have a lot of accessory structures on those properties, and a lot of those properties are already highly involved with organic production and whatnot. So they could become quite interested in this. But we're also we're still talking about M zones and C zones too, right, for this? And so shouldn't there still be?
I'm trying to stick
For
to
the-
ag,
for
we're
the-
dealing totally
ag
with ag
discussion
right
right now,
Yeah.
but, I mean, we can talk about whatever, but.
Well, I was just thinking that these setbacks should also be applying, and there's not specific.
Right. But I think it's different. I think ag, residential adjacent to ag should have different numbers and different consideration than residential adjacent to manufacturing. I really think it's different.
Why?
Well, when we're talking about just impacts from the operation, it's not different. But the cultural considerations, I know people who don't want a publicly listed permitted indoor grow operation near their neighborhood because it's producing a product that has black market value and can potentially generate crime that wouldn't exist if you were producing a product that does not have black market value. So, you know, that's an issue. It's a cultural issue.
That's maybe a specific person or specific instance, but like I was pointing out, and I mean, I'm just pointing it out that there are plenty of residents that abut M zones and C zones just the same. And in the grand scheme of things, this is all novel and it's philosophical, and it could change in the future, right? So the feds change in ag, and cannabis is an ag commodity. Well, then those residents have no say as to what happens on the ag zones. But the residents that abut C zones and M zones do have that say. And so applying the setbacks to all those zones, I mean, you should be giving the residents that live next to C and 4, or C3, C4 and M zones the same considerations as the residents that live next to ag.
Considerations, I think, but I don't think the same considerations, really. I don't know. I mean, it's a different character. A residential neighborhood in a manufacturing zone or adjacent to, that neighborhood has a different character than a residential neighborhood in an ag area. I mean, if you live in the city next to a manufacturing zone, you expect more crime. You probably might have bars on your windows.
Let me
where
give
you're
you
not
an
gonna
example of what I'm thinking of specifically. I mentioned it earlier, the property zone that is where the triplicate building is. There's a little area called Dennyville. On one side is ag and the other side is M. And so those are the same people. We're talking about the same people.
Sure.
But you're saying on one side of their property they should have considerations, and on the other side of their property they should not.
Yeah, that happens all the time in planning, I've noticed, and in zoning
That's what I'm
and
saying.
all
It
of
should
that.
be
You
even
have-
considerations.
Well, it is, you do your best, but there's all kinds of places separate from cannabis throughout county code where you have an attempt to have rules, and on one side of the street you can do one thing, and on the other side of the street you can't. It makes absolutely no sense, but you have to draw the line someplace. And so, I don't know. But I hear what you're saying. I get you.
Yeah, but that's why if you draw the line the same for both,
Or at least try to.
or try to.
Well,
You know, I kind of agree with Kurt and Robert on that one. I mean, I think we should be playing an even ball field for all of them. And if that pushes indoor cultivators to look towards ag land for indoor cultivation because there's no M properties that fit that setback, then so be it. I mean, M can go to manufacturing. I mean, we already have a conflict of the general use plan stated by Heidi earlier today about even allowing for indoor cultivation in M properties because it doesn't have a specific general use there. And we can try to look there and find small things that allow for it, but I mean, you know, again, for the ease of moving forward with something, you know, I would be under the...
Manufacturing and cultivation in a manufacturing zone present the exact same issues. So if you want to have big setbacks for cultivation in an M zone, then you need those same big setbacks for manufacturing in the M zone too, which can't work because you can't have any of the setbacks we're talking about, 100 feet or 500 feet.
But that negates the previous conversations that we've had about the difference between manufacturing as a you know, behind closed door, non-nuisance type business versus indoor cultivation, which has more nuisances related to it than does manufacturing. And so we can't compare apples and oranges. I mean, when we're talking about manufacturing, we're talking
I think it's like comparing two different varieties of apples, actually, because they're very similar and they're not really different fruits.
The processes for both are completely different. I mean, one is cultivating and wasting with waste, and you've got disposal issues with that.
Manufacturing, you've got disposal issues too.
Yeah, but we have a non-volatile ordinance that we've put.
Yeah, but you're going to have tons of cannabis waste, you know, so you got to...
I mean, I don't know why we're going to put up an argument about playing the same game with and having the same ordinance and setback relations for manufacturing. If you're going to have indoor cultivation in manufacturing, those setbacks should be the same as your indoor cultivation on ag land because it doesn't seem...
Right, but we're not even talking about manufacturing on ag land, so we're clearly already saying that it's different. Ag land's different than manufacturing. It's different considerations. We're not even talking about including manufacturing on ag land. So
but we're talking about allowing for indoor cultivation on manufacturing specific zones.
Correct.
That's where we're
because manufacturing, I think, is more suitable for the dual use, and agriculture may not be suitable for the dual use. I don't know. I think I mean, they're both plausible and reasonable ideas and arguments, but
I think we've determined that, you know, that there's not much of an impact that we're going to notice from the outside. Our biggest fear is crime, you know, is it being a
so
public
people's
information, you know,
concerns,
that you have a commercial pot grown in this neighborhood, and then maybe that might bring crime. But I mean, that's going to be the same concern with, you know, we've got nicer neighborhoods, you know, those nicer neighborhoods. If I'm a criminal, you know, I'm not going to go rob my neighborhood.
Well, it's what's
you know,
viable to the board.
I'm going to go to a nicer house, you know.
It's what's viable to the board is what I'm thinking, you know, what's political.
What's viable to the board. I feel, I think it'd be silly to restrict, a couple thousand square feet to a 50-acre parcel, and I really think that that's where we get the 500 square feet comes in is something that really can maybe wiggle for a lot of people, where we're not changing anything about a neighborhood, 500 square feet, honestly, that isn't, there's no employee involved. Maybe you have some family come help you for a week or two every few months, and And I really think that there's no impact. I think that's something that, I really think our residents are entitled to that right now, to be able to start even a home business in certain areas. There's nothing more exciting to getting into business, and there's not many opportunities up here for an hourly wage earner, and so this is kind of perfect, for our community. I'd love to see us do like a cottage scale kind of thing where maybe we'll even help out a participant that's low income and waive the fees for 12 months, or but I think 500 square feet is. I think that's why some of these people have shown up today is they're interested in a small entry level thing, and over, I think almost every one of us has kind of said we're not going to see any impact except for the risk that somebody could potentially find out that business is happening in a neighborhood, and it's such a small business that other than that nobody would notice.
So you make a good point, Robert, and maybe we should also be thinking about, because we were just kind of saying setbacks in general, there should be different setbacks for the sizing, right? Like the cottage size growing should have a very minimal setback. And then if we're talking about these permits that range up to 5,000 square foot, that's a different setback, right? And so that that could allow all of these things to more easily mix together and work with the
yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of 5,000 square foot manufacturing buildings available that are going to meet those suitable requirements for a 5,000 square foot indoor growing facility. A lot of those are going to be probably found in the agricultural zoning area.
What do you guys think of just kind of like, I know it's restrictive to business, but at least in the short run, and for the first incarnation of things, just talking about the 500 square foot only as an indoor, because it's simple, because it doesn't seem to present, it's not such a risky experiment as a 5,000 square foot kind of more commercial industrial, and say if we're going to talk about it, whatever it is, if it's manufacturing, if it's ag land, we start there and learn something about it with the intention of expanding it up.
I think that would be the most politically palatable, and especially if you're going to do it in more than just one zone. If you want the community to embrace it in M and ag and coastal ag at the same time, small would be better.
Keep it out of the neighborhoods, of course, for now. It's not.
I mean, that's a good point, because I think that it lends true to what we've been trying to say and what I think we've all been trying to get to, which is a specialty cottage, small artisanal industry here in this county. And I mean, why not support that right off the bat and say this is where we're going, and if you're not happy with it, go to another county.
Right. It's not like it wouldn't, like if it took another year to get to the bigger scale, that's sort of like, I don't know a lot of people who are ready right now to set up a 5,000 square foot indoor. It takes a year to get that stuff.
I mean, I do believe that I think there's enough interest out there that I think those things would come about pretty quickly once the ordinances are
But
out
if a
there.
year isn't going to kill anything.
I don't think a year is going to kill anybody. Truthfully, a year might save a lot of
It's
people's
probably
butts.
Right, I hear you. Okay. All right.
Where
Well,
this market's going right now.
Let's talk about that some more at the next meeting, about maybe just sticking to that for the first round. And
I mean, I'm sure Joel would be happy with that. It'd be easy for him to write up. It's across the board.
I can't remember, Joel, what's your timeline now on wanting us to stop talking about one thing so you can write on it?
All right, well, I forgot now. I want this thing at the November Planning Commission at the latest, which means really I want to have it written by the end of September.
So we have to kind of be done with an idea by the 1st of September.
yeah, so let's meet.
He was the bike today, but.
I mean, well, I know, but I'm trying to draw it up.
Okay, so seriously, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start writing this based on what I'm hearing. And I'll fine tune it after the next meeting, and then that might be it. Maybe one more if we can squeeze it in.
Perfect.
I'm also going to go pillage Monterey since they have an indoor in the coastal zone approved. And I'm pretty sure it's an existing building. It's huge if I remember. I think you can do almost unlimited if you're in existing buildings, but we would just do it smaller.
We just tailor it.
Let's create the next agenda and set a date for the next meeting. I'd like to meet once a week as often as we can, if we can't do it, just considering our timetable, if that works.
Next week is bad for me. I'm covering child welfare all week.
Yeah, I'm not going to be here next week either. I'm going to be up in Washington.
Blake, I wish we could
I can meet
contact
twice
Blake.
a week.
He never
We can meet on
answers his
Friday.
phone.
He's out of town today, but I would venture to guess that he had next week lined up, because he seems to have
You
these
can't-
2-week things, but.
You're out next week too?
No, I don't.
Oh, you're here?
He's like, I can't
Bobby,
come on.
next week, okay? Kurt?
I couldn't tell you at the
Yeah,
moment.
I might be late next week. I have a doctor's appointment in town here at 9:30, so
I couldn't tell you really at the moment. I mean, it's the last week of summer. I'm not sure what.
I wouldn't be here, but I mean, if most of the discussion's going to be centered around how we get moving forward with a 500 square foot indoor cottage ordinance, I'd be just on board to consent to the board,
Okay.
however you guys want to do it.
Can we work without Joel and get somewhere? Is it worth meeting if?
Yeah,
I'd like it if Blake came.
I
so-
think it's worth your time.
Okay, well, let's just go ahead and schedule it. Can we find out if the chambers are available? And then if it falls apart, maybe we'll reschedule.
Yeah, I mean, I really think just starting with something like this, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
given the fact that we're going to have the retail and manufacturing ordinance presented to the planning commission when, Joel? Do you believe you'll have that presented to the planning commission?
The retail one?
The retail? manufacturing?
Depending on if we can get it to the ERC, maybe September.
Cool, because I mean, you know,
No.
truthfully, once we get that on board, I mean, if we did just allow for some sort of entry-level production capability for the county, it's going to lend itself for that product to be sold to Del Norte Market, hopefully by spring of next year.
Right.
Which would be really kind of a really cool thing for us to be able to accomplish, I think, you know.
So
Just
like-
being able to supply our local retail outlets with locally produced product.
Right.
I know
Well,
Robert
I think
would
also
be
the
ecstatic about
The
that.
county is trying to adhere to their quote-unquote promise to the public
Right,
to
right,
have
To have something. I mean,
something
that
in
would be
place
almost,
by the end of this year.
that would literally, I mean, that would almost be a full-scale ordinance, including retail, manufacturing, and cultivation. The only thing we would be missing out on would be distribution models, you know, and larger scale processing, and large scale cultivation. I think that'd
It
be
doesn't
great.
seem like outdoor cultivation is going to quite make the cut by December, but we can still
No,
keep
but I
working.
mean, our spring planting dates, I mean, you know, as
Yeah,
long
what are
as-
the spring planting dates?
Well, I mean, you know, generally, last couple weeks in May, by June 1st, you want to be in the ground, usually.
Yeah, but you can't be getting your permit and then go put your shit in the ground.
But you would have had to have started, you would have had to have started your plants long before
Yeah, well, I
that,
mean, you know,
right?
once, say if we got through this and we had all of our ordinances through, we were worked through here, and we started in the wintertime here by November, you know, or maybe even, you know, October, discussing some of the outdoor variations of the ordinance. If we could have that in by the end of the year to Joel, to be working on through January and February, you know, if that were to be approved by, say, April, and we could have that process out, I mean, it would be tight for a lot of the growers on an outdoor scale, but again, if we stick to a smaller level, it's not going to put a lot of pressure
You
on
would
us.
technically have to go to a licensed nursery to get
We
your
would, yeah,
plants if
exactly.
you were
We would get our
behind.
stock from a licensed nurse. Basically, anybody at this point, because of the July 1st cutoff date that already passed and is done, anybody who gets a license now to produce any type of cannabis has to get that from a licensed, from the license chain, from the track and trace chain.
Well, if we can get this thing moving and onto the November Planning Commission meeting, after that, the work is done, we're just waiting. So we can spend November, December, and January, and maybe have it on the board in February. I mean,
Hang on just 1 second, Josh. Okay, so if I'm trying to put the agenda here, we're just on item 1, the 500 square foot indoor, and then I'd like to kind of break that down into how we want to talk about it. Setbacks, okay, so zonings, where that would go as like another item. Can we focus that in right now? Like talk about manufacturing, C4 and ag, and just talk about it in those places?
Can we take C4 off that list?
Yeah, that doesn't work for me.
Okay,
I think that's pushing it.
okay, manufacturing, zone, and ag.
And then just lot size. You know,
Okay,
are we going
yeah.
to limit lot size on the
Lot
ag land?
size, and then setbacks respectively, if they're gonna be different between the two or the same.
You know, if we're only doing a 500 square foot
Could
cottage
probably be
grow
the
for
same,
indoor,
and they
maybe
could
we
put-
want to allow it on the, you know, the ag 5s, because of
Sure.
the small scale of that, and then we can start to tier up after that point as we get through, you know, ag 20s, then we can get into the, you know, talking about the 5,000 square foot specialty sizes once we get this incarnation done.
Okay, and then do we need to talk any details about manufacturing, since it's what you're working on now in conjunction with the retail ordinance? Is there like details that we didn't
no,
get to? Okay,
no, that's done.
all right, public comment.
Public comment
would be if you're going to start with a 500 square foot grow, and I don't think anybody listened to Robert when he was actually telling you this, but you are not going to get somebody applying for a 500 square foot cottage indoor permit to go purchase 5 acres of agricultural land. It's pointless. You might as well just keep the ban in place.
Well, it's for people who already have the 5 acres, want to get to work.
Some of you guys do, yeah.
Or rent.
Or rent, okay. Okay, so you'd have to find an indoor place with the power available on ag land.
Or M land.
Or
You're going to
M
have to find either of them regardless.
Right.
So
So
next year, we bring it to the masses. We just have to be patient.
Right.
I
Get your
hope
500
that,
square foot grow down, and we'll
Yeah.
move in next year. I mean,
I would love to see it,
I don't even care about that. There's people who don't want to go any bigger than 500 square feet.
I know
Right.
that for a
And they
fact.
don't want to have employees, and they want to have it as a personal business.
Right.
Exactly.
I've said before
it's a
that I
perfect
can,
entry
I can
level.
envision a future.
But it's still going to
where-
have to be on one of this, like an M zone property.
Why is
I mean,
that?
Why would it be allowed in a residential property? You're going to have to take a residential zone property and rezone it?
Why would you have to rezone it?
Right. This is something that I said
I mean-
like a long time ago. I would like to see a time and a day where society can handle all of that, and it's.
I mean,
and
that-
it's not a
that's
thing,
kind of my
you know,
question
But I
is,
don't think we're there yet.
Why do
honestly.
you
The
have to
board's
rezone
certainly
a
not
property?
there
The,
yet.
the state permit basically says that if you are growing it in an indoor structure that happens to be a residence, it cannot be any more than a quarter of the livable space. So you're gonna need a 2,000 square foot house. None of that falls in place in any type of a, I mean, you're not gonna have it in city. That's the city. I mean,
Yeah.
everywhere else, you have rural residential properties that are zoned RR1A agricultural. They're 5 acre lots.
Right. The places
And-
where they've experimented with this, it's been hit or miss. I think that's one of the areas where it has caused some issues in the beginning. But like
Okay.
I said, I think there could be a time where that kind of stuff kind of fits everywhere.
Yeah.
But I think that's ahead of our time.
Yeah. My question was, when you go through the use permit process, do they or do they not send out notices to all the neighbors around the subject property? Yeah, they do, correct?
Yeah, everyone within 300 feet would receive a notice by mail. The
Right.
site would be posted, and there would be a notification in a newspaper.
Right.
There's no
At a
recourse.
minimum.
Right.
The planning commission can approve it even if with a room full of angry neighbors. I've seen it happen here.
Right.
So it doesn't make any
No,
difference.
I know they do. I
Right,
know they do.
so-
But I mean, you can't really say that this particular zoning has to be in this particular spot because of how people feel, and then send out notices to all the neighbors, and the neighbors show up and go, yeah, we're cool with it, and then you
Right.
say no.
True. I would love that on a case-by-case basis. I'd like everything to fit
It's a private
anywhere.
property rights issue for me.
Sure, I'd like that, like
Yeah.
for Patty on Northcrest. I'd like her to be able to get a letter from that one little private school who doesn't care that she's within 600
different,
feet
though.
and then accept it.
That's a retail outlet that has traffic, that has
Sure.
people that come in, there's traffic coming in and out of it. 500 square
Sure.
foot cottage grows, you're not gonna have traffic, you're gonna have the person running the grow, and they're probably gonna be living on the property. And you're never gonna know when they come and go, and you're not gonna smell it, and you're not gonna see it, and, I mean, you can put all kinds of stipulations before you start writing an ordinance for a 500 square foot grow. I mean, you know as well as I do, it's not very hard to get rid of the smell.
It's not.
There's a billion different ways to do it. Light, if you got light leakage, you're probably gonna end up with some problems.
Okay, Josh, here's what I'm gonna
Right.
do just for you. For item
Right.
2, instead of specifying it to manufacturing and ag zone,
Okay,
we're gonna put discuss appropriate zoning.
sure.
Does that work?
Sounds good to me. Just have the conversation. It's like, I don't want people to just be shoved into manufacturing zones and C4. It shouldn't even want C4 zones. And most of those places, like I said, you know, they're occupied by crab shacks. So now, are we gonna start pushing the crab fishermen out of those areas because they now have to compete with rental prices for cannabis growers? You know, we gotta take care of the other industry that's here. And I just don't want to see it, I don't want to see it shoehorned into one spot, because then all of a sudden you have real estate speculation, which is what we've all
Yep.
been trying to fight from the beginning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I gotta say,
See-
when I was saying like the wiggle, you know, and I was thinking and hoping more like, through the planning commission, maybe, if you had an acre, there'd be potential for you
Right.
to pursue. And I think that'd be appropriate. I think we need more public showing up, showing will that that's
Yeah.
what they want, really.
Yeah.
All right.
That's all.
Time to advertise it. get a billboard for the
What,
next
do you want me to
meeting.
fill the room full of people that are supporting
Yes,
it?
we did.
Okay, I can do
You know
that.
what, that's how we got this moving forward, what,
It
18
takes-
months ago, we had 75 people in this room.
It takes
at a board
$20
supervisor
on a
meeting.
Facebook ad to fill this boardroom.
That's basically what it
Done it
took.
several times. All right. Okay, so we're going to shoot for next week. Is Chambers available?
Yeah, we're already invited.
Dang, all right. So we'll meet here next Wednesday at 10 to talk more about 500 square foot indoor. All right, are we done? Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.